Welcome to This Explainer. I want you to picture the idyllic summer of 1954. Deep in the densely wooded Sandsboy Mountains of southeastern Oklahoma, a group of 22 boys, all 11 and 12 years old, are arriving for what they think is just a typical stay at a summer camp. You know the drill. They're anticipating weeks of swimming, hiking, and classic camp activities. It starts out so warm and light, but we are going to explore a deeply unsettling premise today. We're going to see how these 22 ordinary, completely well-adjusted boys turned into vicious rivals in just a matter of days.
Now, unlike some of our other stories, there's no death or atrocity here. It's a quiet, strange descent into hostility, and honestly, that's what makes the curdling of ordinary human nature so terrifying to watch. Nobody was brainwashed, nobody was threatened with their lives. The animosity we are about to examine was built from absolutely nothing but a name and a game. And that is exactly what makes the findings of this study so deeply unsettling to look back on.
Section 1. 22 Ordinary Boys.
To figure out how this happened, we've got to look at the setup. The researcher behind this, psychologist Muzafer Sherif, deliberately handpicked these 22 boys. They were complete strangers to each other, but they shared almost identical backgrounds. We're talking white, middle-class, Protestant boys from two-parent homes. They were all psychologically healthy and of average or slightly above average intelligence. So why does that matter? Well, Sherif made them as similar as possible so that when conflict inevitably emerged, it couldn't be blamed on individual differences, or background disparities. It had to come from somewhere else entirely. The whole experiment at the 200-acre Robbers Cave State Park was meticulously divided into 3 phases. First up was the in-group formation phase. The boys were split into 2 equal groups and bussed into the camp on separate days. For that entire first week, they were kept completely isolated. Neither group even knew the other existed. They spent their days swimming, hiking, pitching tents, and through these cooperative activities, they quickly formed fast friendships and built a distinct camp identity.
It's actually a brilliant little microcosm of human nature. These isolated clusters spontaneously developed their own cultures. Without any prompting from the adult staff, who, by the way, were actually researchers posing as camp counselors, the boys chose names for their groups. One crew went with the Rattlers, and the other named themselves the Eagles. They stenciled these names onto their shirts, they created their own flags, they became incredibly attached to these new identities, completely unaware that their every single move was being watched and recorded.
Section 2, the tournament begins.
Everything flipped the moment these 2 groups finally discovered each other. As they became distantly aware of the other's presence in the camp, a visceral, immediate territorial instinct just erupted. Before the researchers even had a chance to formally introduce a competition, the boys started claiming resources as their own. Suddenly it was our swimming hole and our campsite. With no history, no past grievances, nothing but the sheer fact that another group existed, something inside them instantly wanted an enemy. Take the Rattlers, for example. They quickly claimed the camp's single baseball field as their exclusive territory. They literally took it over to the point where they talked about putting up a keep off sign. They proudly erected the Rattler flag on the backstop of the pitch and started making real threatening remarks about what they would do if anybody from the Eagles dared to touch it. The battle lines were being drawn.
Now, the researchers moved to the friction phase. They staged a competitive tournament, baseball, tug-of-war, a treasure hunt, with a single trophy and pocket knives awarded only to the winners, no consolation prizes. Within days, the tension just snapped. It started with name-calling on the baseball diamond, someone shouting "dirty shirt," but it escalated incredibly fast. The Eagles burned the Rattlers' flag. The Rattlers retaliated by tearing up the Eagles' second flag. Soon they were launching nocturnal, commando-style raids on each other's cabins. They're overturning beds, ripping mosquito netting, stealing private property. It got so intensely aggressive that boys actually began hoarding rock-filled socks as makeshift weapons to defend against counter-raids. The hatred was very real, and remember, it was entirely manufactured by competition. Nobody taught them to do this. Section 3. When contact fails.
By this point, the situation had degenerated into pure hostility. The researchers physically had to step in and pull the fighting boys apart. It was time for the final phase of the experiment, conflict resolution. And they tried the most obvious fix first, right? They assumed that simply bringing these warring factions together on equal footing would cool tensions, so they organized outings, shared meals in the dining hall, set up a movie night.
So, does simply putting rivals in the same room create peace? The answer here was a resounding no. Mere contact completely failed. The boys just flat out refused to associate with one another. When they were forced to share the dining hall, things escalated immediately. They literally held their noses when the outgroup was near, shouted epithets across the room, and the shared meals frequently ended in massive food fights. Putting them in the same room didn't fix the hatred, it just gave them a venue to weaponize it.
Section 4. The discovery of shared goals. Realizing that simple contact was basically throwing gasoline on the fire, the researchers shifted to a pivotal new tactic. If competition tore them apart, what would happen if they faced a problem that neither group could possibly solve alone? They started secretly staging camp-wide emergencies, what they called superordinate goals, that absolutely required joint effort. One day, the camp's drinking water supply mysteriously stopped flowing. The staff blamed vandals. Parched and thirsty, members of both the Eagles and the Rattlers gathered around a sabotaged water faucet. For 45 minutes, suggestions were flying in from all sides, as boys who were enemies just days earlier worked side by side to clear the obstruction. When the water finally flowed, they rejoiced together. The Rattlers even stepped back and allowed the thirstier Eagles to drink first, without a single complaint. Later, when a food delivery truck became stuck in a rut, those same boys worked rope and rope alongside each other, pulling it out of sheer necessity. The shared problem had suddenly made the group boundary irrelevant.
Another massive breakthrough happened over a movie. The camp staff offered to rent the film Treasure Island, but announced it would cost $15, which the camp supposedly couldn't fully cover. After a ton of enthusiastic discussion, the boys agreed to pool their own money. Even though some Eagles had already gone home, which meant the individual contributions were unequal, both groups willingly pitched in their share to make it happen. This was a profound turning point. By working toward a shared goal that everybody wanted, the bitter rivalry just continued to melt away.
Section 5. What the boys never knew.
By the end of this 3-week experiment, the transformation was staggering. Former rivals were now sitting together at breakfast and lunch completely by choice. They even asked to share the exact same bus ride home to Oklahoma City. When they stopped for refreshments on the way, the Rattlers actually used $5 they had won in a contest to buy malted milkshakes for everyone, Eagles included. And through it all, these 22 boys were completely unaware they were the subjects of a groundbreaking psychological study, which brings us to Sherif's major conclusion, one that reshaped social psychology forever. It's called realistic conflict theory. It proves that intergroup hostility isn't rooted in individual bad character or neuroses or deep-seated prejudice. Instead, hostility arises naturally when groups compete for scarce, limited resources. And more importantly, you can't restore positive relations just by telling people to get along. Hostility is only dissolved by superordinate goals, shared challenges that force united, cooperative action.
Now, there is a fascinating modern footnote to all of this. As decades have passed, psychologists have scrutinized the methodology of the Robbers Cave experiment. Some argue that the researchers themselves acted as a powerful, unseen third group. By staging competitions, intentionally creating frustrations, and essentially stirring the pot, the subtle manipulations of the camp staff might have shaped those violent outcomes far more than just natural group dynamics alone. It is a sobering reminder of how easily and quietly authority can guide us into conflict.
Section 6. The thread connecting everything.
As we wrap up this explainer, let's take a step back and look at the thread connecting this to everything else we know about human behavior. Robbers Cave isn't just an isolated story about kids at summer camp. It sits at the very foundation of our understanding of group dynamics and human cruelty. Think about the other famous studies. Stanley Milgram's shock experiments showed us the terrifying power of obedience to authority from above. The Stanford Prison Experiment demonstrated how cruelty can be invented from below, with people just adopting perceived roles. Operation Searchlight showed both of those combined at a national scale. But Robbers Cave? It shows us something even more primal. It reveals that the us versus them instinct underneath all of it doesn't need a dark history. It doesn't need a complex ideology, or even orders from a commander. It just needs two groups to exist and a reason for them to compete.
So, I want to leave you with a question to chew on. Look inward at your own life for a second. Think about your office departments, your political affiliations, your favorite sports teams. How many of your own daily rivalries are really based on anything meaningful at all? Or are they just this exact same ancient territorial reflex, dressed up with a modern name and a different colored flag? It's a provocative thought, isn't it? Really makes you realize just how fragile our civilization actually is.
Thank you for watching Dark Chronicles. Real stories, verified sources. Follow for more.